Go ahead.
Well, I've become firmly convinced that in many ancient civilizations, the Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Egyptians, that the cannabis plant was known as the tree of life because it essentially sustained us physically and spiritually and economically. And it starts with the seed. That's partly why I have the front cover with the seed, because we've been eating cannabis seeds for millions of years. It's not just something we started to use when we came across fire. We've been eating seeds since we were dinosaurs.
Right.
And since we had not much more than the brain of a squirrel, we learned to store these seeds over the winter time. That you could essentially, take a cannabis stalk and sort of hit it on the ground a few times, and a bunch of seeds would fall out that you could store over the winter time. And that those seeds would not only provide a good source of food, but that if you threw a few of them back onto the ground in the spring, that they would grow real thick and big, and all of a sudden you'd have this huge pile of seeds that in the fall you could again collect, and then you'd have this, awesome food source. So I'm certain that through ice ages that were quite likely responsible for the extinction of dinosaurs, that our very small, very, kind of smart ancestors started to use cannabis. And that's why the endocannabinoid system is so important to humans. And, a lot of vertebrae have got, these endocannabinoids, which are essentially similar to the cannabinoids that are in the cannabis plant. So if you look at the essential fatty acids and proteins that are in the seed, well, that's essentially what we are made of, right? And so you are what you eat. And so I'm certain that
Yes.
for very long periods of time, we would eat a lot of hemp seeds to survive, these very rough time periods. Certainly when things were flourishing and it was a jungle, we could eat all sorts of stuff. But when things were tough, we lived off hemp seeds for millions and millions and millions of years. And then as well, we would have developed hash, because in part we would have collected hemp seeds. You would have ended up with some resin on your hands, and at some point after developing fire, we would have rubbed it together and we would have ended up with this hash that we would have burned and discovered that it changes our sense of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And even before that, I should back up, the next use of the plant would have probably been the stalk, where we literally would have took the cannabis stalks and just wove it together very simply for a mat on the floor of our huts. So, because it would have been the strongest fiber that we could have used, and it's an antifungal, and insects and stuff would have stayed away, and it would have stayed there a lot longer. And gradually we would have developed, weaving and canvas essentially, from that process.
From that. Now, you've in the book, you're going way back. Like, I know we know about the discovery of the tombs, 2,000, 2,700 years ago, where people were using cannabis, and within the history stuff, you're talking tribal things and areas, and then how wars were started and stuff all over the cannabis, hemp, and the whole bit. So it was for me, I knew some of the stuff through reading Jack's book, but even yours goes in, I found, even a little further into the history and the religion aspects and the wars of it. So it was quite the knowledge in order to pick up, where you don't hear people talking about that very often.
Well, I owe a lot to my friend Chris Bennett. He's written 3 books now: Marijuana, Magic, and Religion. The Green Gold, The Tree of Life, Marijuana, and Magic, and Religion.
Yes, I saw those.
Bible, and Cannabis the Soma Solution. His last book, I really didn't quote it in there. But I owe a tremendous amount to Chris. He really taught me a lot about it.
Okay, now let's move on to the next chapter. It was about hemp. You write about the many uses and where it was grown. While it is grown here in Canada today under strict conditions, is there other places around the world where it's grown where maybe it's not as strict, where it's a little bit more open up?
Oh, certainly. There's some places in the world where prohibition never stopped them from growing hemp. China, for example, has been producing hemp products for thousands of years. That's where hemp paper was first made, a couple thousand years ago. And so they've also been. We got this hemp board. I don't have it here, but they make plywood out of the herds. Like the hemp, the stalk has got fiber on the outside and like a cork in the middle.
Yeah.
And so the cork can be turned into a press board and paper and stuff. So they make a press board in China out of it, and that's like the clothing I'm wearing is actually hemp, but it's made in China. And so they've really, and it's also something that the Chinese have been very good at marketing, and so the linen that is sold in stores today from China is actually hemp, but they call it linen so that people won't know what it is and they get it past the marketers. The only linen that isn't made out of hemp is Irish linen, which is made out of flax. But any other linen that comes from China is actually hemp disguised as something else. But yeah,
Put a different name on it. It's sort of like pharmaceutical drugs. Instead of calling it heroin, they call it Oxycontin, right?
Yeah. And in Spain and France, they grow a lot of hemp to use for cigarette papers and rolling papers.
Right.
And they also, I think that's where they grow the hemp that they use in making bills, because of a lot of, currency. We got this plastic money stuff anyway. A lot of it's had a certain amount of hemp in it for various reasons. It's just a really good paper-making product.
Now, just to flip back to the history section for a second, in the movie we just watched, plus in your book, you talk about people used to be able to pay their taxes with it.
Oh yeah, back in the 1700s and 1800s, hemp was essential for a good navy, because it was used for rope and the canvas for the sails, and so there was a lot of pressure on the British to get hemp from other sources, because the British had a really big navy, but they couldn't grow hemp very well. And so when they helped develop the colonies, the main reason for that was actually for essentially raw hemp that was then shipped back to Britain and manufactured. And so farmers were at one point, I think, that the king passed a decree that 10% of the land had to be in hemp cultivation, and that there were other times where it was required that hemp was part of the taxes, or that you could pay all of your taxes just in bales of hemp.
Wow. Now, being our country is celebrating the War of 1812 before we were even a country, and the British came over here and helped the Native Indians in this war against the U.S. What was on those ships, like, to come over here? Like you say, the sails were made with hemp. A lot of the clothing and stuff like that was made from hemp.
Yeah, the rope was all made out of hemp as well, and I guess they used a kind of hemp glue, sort of resin, from the sea to help plug the holes for the ship as well.
Seal it and the whole bit.
Yeah, like sealant that used hemp oil in it as well. But the heaviest uses would certainly be all the rope and the sail cloth as well.
Do you think that
for the canvas, right? So,
do you think while we're celebrating that here in Canada, do you think that they'll mention any of this in that in this celebration, that how important hemp was in that war?
Oh, the upper government will never do anything like
that.
No,
they won't do that. No. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter, the healing nature chapter. Within that, you touch on conditions that it helps, along with side effects of legal choices. Did you do this to show people that there is a choice, like sort of, because you do compare some of the drugs to to cannabis for medical reasons. I guess that sort of helped show people the difference.
Yeah, I tried to write that chapter in the most effective way that I could. And I tried to write it for people as well, like I've tried to write the whole book for people to read that have really no experience with cannabis at all.
Yeah.
And so having, comparisons and kind of a broader approach was important to me. And so, I'm writing the whole book. I try to keep my opinion out and just kind of put in facts. And
Exactly.
Right? So it's like, I have my opinions, but this is what others have said, and kind of document that as much as possible.
Right.
Because, in a lot of cases, experts have written things far better than I could have rewritten. And so, like in particular, like, that chapter also talks about some of the potential consequences of using cannabis.
Correct. It does. Yes. You don't look at it as just cannabis has no harm. You actually include the side effects in it as well. Yep.
Yeah,
which a lot of people don't recognize, and you have to do that.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of negative consequences of cannabis use as well, and heard enough to know that it's not this wonderful drug that's going to make everybody feel better, like maybe acid is. I'm kidding, but it's
well,
something
you touch on that. You do touch on that, so we're going to get to that in a second. We're getting there. We're not there yet.
Jumping ahead, yeah. But it's something that I think people need to be aware of the good, the bad, and the very good. And there's lots of benefits of this plant, but there are things people should be aware of, especially in dealing with youth. I think too obvious when people are humans are still developing. You shouldn't be giving them strong drugs. Like it just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, we're going to pause for the YouTube cause, and then we'll get on to a couple more questions, and then we'll be done. Be right back.